Chapter 93 Raging Flames Burning the Enemy. After revealing the fact that he was someone from the Yi clan, the dwarf involuntarily puffed out his chest. As if he could draw support from the words he just spoke, the tone of his voice also got more bold. It seemed like he was extremely confident about the fame associated with the name Yi clan from the Qinyu mountain range. Seeing how courageous the dwarf became all of a sudden, Han Li knew that the Yi clan had to be a famous immortal clan. However, even though the dwarf had such an impressive backing, he had still panicked during the start of the fight and made mistakes that clearly showed that he did not lie. He was just a nobody within the immortal clan. His life or death held no significance to the clan, which would not stir even if he perished. Han Li made his judgment within a few short moments. In his heart, he had already decided to finish off his opponent, since he knew that there wouldn't be any future repercussions. This deduction destroyed the last thread of sympathy within Han Li, whose heart began to surge increasingly with a strong murderous intent. After all, his opponent's magic power could not be compared to Han Li's. Even the dwarf's movements and actions were that of an idiot, despite the dwarf being an immortal cultivator. However, how rare was it to find a immortal cultivator here? Even if there were no conditions of a death match, Han Li would not give up this chance and reject this big gift. In addition, Han Li could easily deduce that the dwarf was not a kind-hearted being based on his mannerisms and speech. Thus, when Han Li moved into action, he did not have the slightest hesitation. Qinyuling, Yi clan, could it be he's from that famous clan? Surprise appeared on Han Li's face as if he believed the dwarf's words. Since his opponent dared to use this name to intimidate him, Han Li silently guessed that this clan should be quite famous among immortal cultivators. It's exactly that Yi clan. Brother, you've actually heard of the Yi clan, so I believe you won't purposely make things difficult for me. Seeing how the great name of the Yi clan affected Han Li, the dwarf started to boast and speak in a loud voice. Yi clan? Han Li pretended to hesitate, as he scratched his head, displaying an expression of contemplation. Upon seeing this situation, joy bloomed in that dwarf's heart. He immediately rushed to the side and frenziedly hit the drum, creating a cacophony of noise. He was extremely afraid that the situation would turn out disadvantageous for him if this dragged on. How about this? I will bring you to see one of the clan's elders and we'll let the upper management decide how we should deal with this. How about it, brother? Han Li replied as if he was being put into a difficult position. No need for such troubles. This is just a small matter. If you want the elders to get involved in such a small affair, I'm afraid it would leave a bad impression in the eyes of the elder and would be greatly detrimental to your future progress. The moment the dwarf heard Han Li's reply, he couldn't help but jump in shock. He hurriedly put on a caring face, trying to dissuade Han Li. Monk Golden Light saw Han Li as an inexperienced young immortal cultivator who was traveling to gain worldly experience. He thought that Han Li had always been trapped inside his clan and made to cultivate. The only possible explanation for Han Li's youthful age and his profound magic power was that he had only recently come out to the secular world. Thank you, brother, for your reminder. Han Li appeared very touched, lowering his head as he pondered. Extending his arms, he took out the talisman with the picture of a small sword etched over it. This is the first time I met you, but brother has already shown such great care for me. I think I shall return this treasure to you, its original owner. Deceptively, Han Li spoke in a sincere tone, although there were some lingering traces of unwillingness in his expression. The dwarf was extremely happy. To think that the immortal cultivator in front of him was so naive that he would want to return the treasure that the dwarf had just lost. Afraid that any hesitation would cause Han Li to change his mind, the dwarf stopped thinking further about it and hurriedly decided. As he waved his hands, the golden barrier around him dissolved completely. He extended his hand to get back his talisman and rudely said, "Since brother is so sincere, I will no longer be polite." Seeing the dwarf had extended his hand in an attempt to grab the talisman, Han Li's expression abruptly underwent a huge change. He pointed to the back of the dwarf and excitedly called out, "Clan leader." Why has this esteemed elder arrived at this place? Upon hearing this, the dwarf froze, so frightened that he no longer cared about the treasure. He turned his head around, but there was no one there, only silence. OSHT. No matter how stupid the dwarf was, he knew that he had fallen for Han Li's trap. Hurriedly turning back his head, he could only feel a hot sensation near his chest. Soon after, flames started rising up his body, covering him in a sea of flames. In the blink of an eye, the dwarf was incinerated into ashes. After this moment, Han Li let out a long sigh and retracted the hand that he had used to shoot out the fireball earlier. Using the small fireball technique and killing his opponent with a single move, the whole process seemed extremely simple, but he had actually expended a great deal of effort under a lot of pressure in order to come up with this plan. Now that his sneak attack had succeeded, a joyful smile broke out on his face, and he praised himself silently. Jia Tianlong and Wang Juchu had clearly seen what happened just now, but they did not understand what they saw. Because neither Han Li nor the dwarf was willing to let others listen into their conversation, they had spoken in extremely low tones. The spectators were too far away and thus were unable to hear their voices. They only knew that upon seeing Han Li, the dwarf got extremely afraid, but after exchanging a few sentences, the dwarf appeared to be sincerely begging Han Li for something. During the final moments, they saw that when the dwarf's back was turned, Han Li had abruptly unleashed a fireball and incinerated the feral Wolfgang's backer, easily disintegrating him into a layer of white dust. Jia Tianlong felt a bitter taste in his mouth, so bitter that it seeped deep into his heart. How could this have happened? Originally, the outcome was in their favor, but why did it end up like this? After this unremarkable disciple of the Seven Mysteries sect appeared, everything was suddenly turned upside down. Even Monk Golden Light, an immortal cultivator, was burned to a state where he couldn't be any more than dead. On the other hand, Wang Juchu's emotions were naturally opposite from that of his great enemy. He tightly gripped the hilt of his long sword that was placed on his waist, and was looking over with an excited expression. Squatting in an ungraceful posture, he looked at Han Li, who easily swept away the dwarf, while showing a fervent expression on his face. The current Han Li was very excited. However, this was not just excitement from winning against the dwarf. From Monk Golden Light's ashes, he discovered a few items that had not been burned into ashes. There weren't many items, only a talisman, a command medallion and a book. The talisman was the one that the dwarf had used to erect the golden barrier. Although Han Li did not know the incantation, it was still sufficient enough to drive him wild with joy. Currently, the thing that he needed most of all was a protective measure that could be used to save his life. The command medallion was a black, triangular-shaped object. On one side, there were golden words carved upon it, Immortal Ascension, while on the other side, the word command was engraved in silver. The entire command medallion didn't seem to be made from metal, but it was heavy and solid to the touch. Han Li had no idea what it could be used for. And as for that book, Han Li knew that this had to be some extraordinary object, given the fact that it wasn't burned into a crisp after he unleashed his fireball technique. But after flipping through a few pages, he realized that this book was actually a genealogical record of some sort, a record of those that were surnamed Qin. Han Li did not know what this had to do with Monk Golden Light, nor why it was so important that the dwarf carried it in his possession. This dwarf said that he was a disciple from the Yi clan, but he brought along a genealogical record of those who were surnamed Qin. Could he be a bastard child of the Yi clan? Greatly disappointed, Han Li made a few malicious guesses.